Welcome to another episode of TMI Tuesdays, the women's health podcast where nothing is off limits. I'm Lauren, your new favorite vagina, aka women's health physio, and I'm here to have honest, practical, and unfiltered conversations about women's health across every stage of life. If you enjoy this episode, I'd absolutely love it if you subscribed on Spotify and shared it with someone who might also benefit. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get started. Hello and welcome back to TMI Tuesdays. It's Lauren here, and I'm really excited to introduce our guest this week. I have Sarah Burke Dimitrov here with me, and we're going to chat a lot about baby wearing, and I'm really excited. We were just talking before we started recording about some pieces and how pelvic health can maybe integrate and come into this. So I'm really excited to learn from Sarah about this and to have this conversation. So thank you so much, Sarah, for joining me today to dive into all things about baby wearing. I'll do a little intro about you first. So Sarah lives near Victoria, BC, in an area called North Saanich, for those who aren't familiar with Victoria, with her husband and 2 young children. And after over 10 years of work and volunteer experience in reproductive and perinatal health, communication, healthcare policy, and peer support, Sarah recently certified as a baby-wearing educator and started a company called Heartkey Babywearing. She has a Master's of Science in Public Health focused on reproductive and perinatal health and a BA in communications. She is also a volunteer peer supporter with La Lash League Canada. So very experienced, lots of knowledge, lots of training, and I can't wait to hear more about it. So welcome, Sarah. Welcome to TMI Tuesdays.
Thank you so much, Lauren. It's great to be here. It's great to chat with you.
Yeah, I feel like I'm going to learn so much from you. So I'm really excited about this conversation, and I hope our audience is as well. So why don't you tell me how you got into baby wearing? I mean, I know just based on this intro, your background is very in alignment, but I was saying before we pressed record that I didn't even realize that this was an area that you can specialize in, and seems like it's becoming a big movement around putting education out there. So tell us more about how you got into this.
Yeah. So, I mean, I first got into baby wearing, I guess, when I had my first child, like she's turned 5. But really, when I think about it, I guess I was a little bit into it even before. I was kind of the friend who would buy the baby carrier from the registry for my friends. Didn't know anything about them other than like, I know you want to have one because you're going to want to keep your baby close. But didn't know anything, but I would, if there was a baby carrier on that registry, I was the one who got it for the friend. And when I had my first, she wanted to be close to me. That was something that it's funny, I knew to expect, but also didn't know to expect it to the level that it was, right? Like, I feel like we see so much in the media, and often we're not around newborns, especially. We see so much, you put the baby down in a bassinet, in a crib, in a swing, on the floor, and then then in the media, we don't even see the baby again, right? Like, it's totally fine. And so I got into baby wearing because I didn't have a baby I could just put down and kind of do things, right? I needed to keep her close. And then a little bit more, I got into it. I actually worked with a baby wearing educator a couple times with my first. And then when I was pregnant with my second, I was exploring different ways that I could wear my toddler. A lot of the carriers that I had been using, or like my main carrier, didn't really work for my body at that point with my growing bump. And she still wanted up in my arms, of course. And I knew that there were ways of doing that with different styles of carriers, but I didn't want to, buy a bunch of carriers and not know how to use them. And so I kind of invested the time and energy to learn how to use a ring sling, which allowed me to do a hip carry, not getting in the way of my bump. And then also was really interested in an Buhimo style carrier, which is a carrier that doesn't have a waistband, that's typically used for like a high back carry. So I worked a bit with a couple educators, went down a bit of that online rabbit hole, and with my second did tons of baby wearing. And then I decided, as I was thinking about what was next for my professional path, to look into becoming a baby wearing educator. And I did that in the fall of 2025.
Amazing. And where is that education?
Yeah, so there are a few organizations who provide baby wearing education training. The one that I did it with is called the Center for Baby Wearing Studies. They're based in the US. The founder and owner, Joanna McNeely, is based in New York City. and she's been teaching baby wearing for over a decade, teaching baby wearing and also teaching baby wearing education. And maybe I can even kind of differentiate that a little bit, right? So for me, doing this training was really about going beyond being the friend who would help people with their carriers, or if I saw someone and they were like, I don't know if I'm using this right, I could sort of help them a little bit. I knew sort of the main sort of safety considerations about positioning, but often I'd be like, I don't actually know how to help you. I know how to do it well for myself, but I don't know kind of beyond. And so becoming a baby wearing educator was really about learning how to teach others. So learning how to teach others to like start from scratch, putting their baby carrier on their body, bringing their baby to their body, and then also kind of those fixes, like those fit checks, and then beyond, right? A little bit more about infant development, matrescence, parents kind of coming into their own becoming and using this tool that is as old as humanity, right? Us being able to keep our babies close and carry them. And so that was really what it's about for me. I kind of went into it with, oh, I'll be able to help people, get a better fit with their carrier, teach them how to use them, that there are different styles of carriers. And then what I gained has been so much more of an understanding of the sort of like the art and practice and much larger knowledge base around baby wearing than I ever even knew existed. So yeah,
Yeah,
so that's been that difference for me.
I was gonna comment on that as well because before we connected and I met you, I just thought of
Hmm.
baby wearing, yeah, it's just like a mechanical thing and it's just, a means to an end. And when we connected, I was like, oh, people actually work in this area and specialize
Yeah.
in this. And it's more of a philosophy and an art. And
Hmm.
yeah, there seems to be a big history around it in ancient knowledge. So why don't you share a little bit about that, the history of baby wearing and some of
Yeah,
the ancient practice of carrying babies?
sure. I mean, yeah, there's definitely some. I mean, it's hard sometimes, right, to have that kind of historical and anthropological knowledge, especially when some of it is sort of lost. And so, when we often think about baby wearing now, and whether we actually call it baby wearing or we call it using a baby carrier, it's kind of all the same. But really, baby wearing or carrying our infants is as old as humanity is, right? And so we all know that baby humans can't walk, they can't crawl, they're not mobile. If they're near us, those of us who've been with newborns, they can move. It's not like they can't move at all, but we move a lot as adult humans, right? We have to get from point A to point B, whether we're talking about our modern society of just moving around in your kitchen so you can make yourself a sandwich, right? Like having your hands free and moving about, or whether we talk about literally like picking up your stuff and moving because you're more, a nomadic in a nomadic setting. And so we've always needed to carry our babies, and generally we've always needed to tend to our own needs as the adult caregiver, mother, and also tend to other children, tend to other members of our families, right? The elderly, make food, care for our community. So that's the same now as it has always been. And baby humans expect to be close to their caregiver. So we've always carried them. When we look at primates, they carry their young as well. Their young can kind of hold on, and we don't have that long hair for them to hold on to anymore. Though, lots of babies will get great comfort out of like stroking or touching or pulling on their caregiver's hair. Lots of moms that I even know will say like, oh, my kid loves to stroke my hair. It's something that we're kind of biologically ready to do, right? Like babies have reflexes that really tell us that they expect to be carried. So when that cute sort of like planter grass where you put your finger in their hand and they close on it, right? Like that's a way for them to hang on. We don't have that hair for them to hang on to, but they can still kind of hang on to us. And then when we use cloth or carriers or things like that, they will often kind of grasp onto those things. They have the planter grasp too, right? Like we see that on their feet. And if there's anything is, from your physio perspective, that you're like, oh yeah, that thing. But all of these reflexes, right? Even the moral reflex where, when they're being being carried on our bodies, they will experience that startle reflex, that Moro reflex, and that's part of their learning. They have to integrate that, right? They're learning what is safe around them. Maybe they're being startled by a loud noise, and then they're realizing, okay, but nothing happened. They look up to our face. We're like fine. They're like, okay, like it's safe. And slowly that reflex kind of integrates. And yeah, like they need to be near their food source, right? They have tiny stomachs. Human milk is digested really quickly. They need to feed frequently. So they need to be near us to be able to do that. And so all of these things, and we'll talk about, I think a little bit later, we can kind of get into even how baby wearing changes because they develop on our body, right? Like they're on us, we hold them, but they're not stationary, right? They move their muscles, they practice things that they do on the floor. But when we think about, carrying our babies, there's also been such a break in that knowledge. And by break, I don't mean like a pause, but I mean like literally breaking, like losing knowledge, no longer doing it. And part of that was because of certain inventions, like when the stroller was invented, like it wasn't the stroller back then, it was like the pram in the 1700s, right? And it was sort of thought that it was better to not have your baby on you, but to put them in this modern device. You put them in this modern device, you put them in modern devices to sleep. You put them on this schedule where you feed them at certain intervals. You don't feed them from your body. Yeah, so with some modern, and by modern, I don't mean like the 2000s, but 1700s, invention of the pram, and us starting to be told to put our babies into, modern devices rather than use what had traditionally been used, right? Like cultures across the world have their traditional cloths, and some of them have cloth and straps, different ways of, and of course, cradle boards, baskets, right? Like all of these things that were used differently in some societies, but sometimes there's such similarities, even though those societies seem to be far away from each other geographically. So that's really interesting too. And I'm still really learning lots about this. But all of these things, led to us being just lots of those sort of like behavioral pieces in those 1700s. And then that continued around the independence of the infant and these ideas of either, schedules or separation from the caregiver in order to sort of build strong humans or a particular type of human. And those things were all related to sort of no longer baby wearing, right? And baby wearing being seen as primitive or not as modern or not as good, not something to be favored in sort of that the Western world. And that led in lots of places to no longer, carrying our infants in the same way. We still have to carry our infants. So we're using our arms instead, which posturally is not always the best for our bodies, right? The way that we sort of adjust to that weight and bearing that weight on our body just in our arms or in devices. So eventually, pram strollers, car seats, and various devices that we have in our home also to try to keep them happy with movement without the movement being with us. I'm definitely not saying any of those things are bad. We need car seats because we use cars. I use strollers with my kids all the time, right? But it's just more of that all or nothing piece that doesn't really serve us very well. And it led to us no longer having knowledge, which then means baby wearing educators are needed. Or they didn't necessarily have baby wearing educators, obviously the profession or sort of the role, but there was just knowledge that was passed down. There was being around people who did this. There was wearing babies when you yourself were a child or an adolescent and you were sort of growing up with it, and just ways that it was always done and people around you could show you how to do it. We don't have that anymore. And there is a relationship with colonialism and, white supremacy and racism around eliminating things that kept families close, Indigenous families close, right? That allowed them to practice their culture and trying to eliminate all of those things, right?
That's super interesting. I was going to ask who invented the stroller, the pram, and
Gosh.
what was their rationale for it? Was it designed for older babies or was it originally designed to be brought in for infants as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have a colleague, a baby wearing educator in the US. She's in Washington State. Her name is Cassidy Eisenfeld. On Instagram, she's Let's Talk Baby Wearing. So she's quite popular. And lately, she's been doing a bit of a dive into the history of some of these things. And so she has a really really awesome post about the invention of the pram. Okay, I think I found it. If you want us to. Okay, so it's thought that the perambulator, which was like the initial name for the pram, right? So when you think about
Perambulator?
perambulator,
Perambulator.
yes.
Okay.
Sorry, no. Okay, let's get that. Let me start again. So it's thought that the perambulator, right? So when we think about ambulation, probably like
Ambulator.
ambulator, the perambulator was designed as the first baby carriage for the Duke of Devonshire in 1733 by architect William Kent. And so it was like pulled by a goat. It was a status symbol,
Pulled by a
right?
goat.
Pulled by a
Interesting.
goat. And then it became that it was something that you could push, right, with the wheels. And in the Victorian era, pushing a baby in a pram became associated with wealth and prestige. So all of these
Mm.
things, right? Kind of now with like, ooh, a certain car, and even now a certain stroller, right?
Up a
Certain
baby.
strollers.
Yeah.
Yeah, like certain strollers, certain devices we buy are status symbol, even certain baby carriers, right? Which is where I'm not like someone needs this baby carrier. Like with everything else, there's functionality, but there's like style and design and prestige and all these things that come with anything that is bought and sold in the modern era, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so interesting. I love learning about the history. And, I could see where, this ties into a lot of other things around human biology and evolution. But a lot of people struggle in what I see in my practice, a lot of people struggle with baby wearing because they think it's hurting their back and they're not strong enough. And, it's if it's something that in society it's what your body does and it's used to doing, we've almost lost the ability for our bodies to feel strong and functional doing that postpartum. So that's very interesting how some of these devices and evolution and new technology, it feels like it's helping us, but it almost removes our body's natural ability to do certain things over time as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially when like I cared for some kids a little bit, had a couple nephews before I had a niece before I had children, but I was never, kind of invited into wearing them. They were baby, they were carried, but possibly a little bit more in a baby transportation kind of way. And what I mean by that is sort of this whole conversation we've had so far around like we need to transport our babies, right? We need to move them from point A to point B because we do that as adults. And we do that often by just picking them up in our arms, right? We carry them. And sometimes we transport them with car seats or strollers. And sometimes we do use baby carriers, but okay, I need to get from point A to point B. So I'm going to use the carrier, get the baby in. And as soon as I can take them out of that, that's what I'm going to do. Right. And so baby wearing is a little bit more intention behind it, where it's maybe for other goals than transportation. So sometimes it is transportation and soothing go together, right? I'm going to
Mhm.
go for a walk and baby's going to soothe and maybe fall asleep. And then that'll be great. But sometimes it's also a little bit more having a goal of kind of that bonding or connection or soothing, or like wearing for longer than 30 minutes in a time, wearing multiple times during the day. Or it doesn't have to be that you're using a baby carrier for 8 hours without a break. Like, no, that would be very hard on anyone's body. But even if it is just these, a few times a day in these certain periods of time where baby is just needing that closeness and we're needing to move our bodies for whatever reason, including our mental health, right? Wanting to get
Mhm.
outside. It's great for baby. It's great for us. Connecting with our community, right? Like going for a coffee and being able to have baby close and they stay calm. And some babies are great sitting in their stroller, and that can be lovely as well. But sometimes having, just like different tools we can use. But when we were talking about our bodies, right? Like if some of us were kind of involved in this practice and we done this with our body before it was our own child, we just have a different relationship also with how our body would be used to that, in terms of what you were saying before with like the back pain or not being strong enough. And also, if we start to, we start to carry our infant in arms when they're born, if we start to carry them on our body when they're born, our body's strength also increases with our child's growth, right? With the weight that increases over time. If we've done only limited anytime we needed to, take them in our arms, but as soon as we can, put them down until they're 6 months old, and now we want to start wearing them on our body using a carrier, it's going to be a different experience than if we started when they were smaller and we just slowly built up that strength and that tolerance and that, that weight bearing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like anything. If you don't do it, you're never going to get better or stronger at it. And starting right from the get-go, your body, when your baby is still smaller and lighter, and your body slowly builds that tolerance to it. So interesting. And one thing that I hear a lot from clients is, oh, my baby doesn't like the carrier. I wish I could use the carrier during the day or baby wear during the day and have my hands free. And, but my baby doesn't like the carrier, is really fussy. So what, is that something, a different carrier, a different approach can help? Or are there some babies that just don't ever like it or adapt to it? What's your philosophy or approach on that?
I'd say I absolutely believe them that their baby's fussy, right? Like babies cry to communicate with us. And so there can be a few different things that are going on. One is that for sure, if that baby hasn't really been used to it, it's a new experience. So they may tell us like, this feels weird. I don't like that. And they're being fussy. When we think about maybe sort of earlier on when we're trying with like a newborn and we're sort of getting used to it, thinking of a few different things, right? We want to try when baby is like fed, calm, changed, right? Like we can never know all of their needs have been met, but all of those needs that we're thinking of have already been met. And we're not trying for the first time or the first few times when they are already dysregulated, because we are also dysregulated in that situation. And so you've got baby who's fussing and crying, and then someone who's trying to learn a new skill, right? The caregiver is trying to learn a new skill, and perhaps not in a way that is supported by anyone who has knowledge and can kind of even hold space for like, yeah, babies cry. Like sometimes they cry and we need to give them a minute to get used to it or any of that, right? So really trying to put all of the parameters in place so that it's a positive experience for both baby and caregiver, just to start out with. Sometimes some young babies, if you put them near their food source and you don't feed them, they're quite unhappy. So a little bit less often with a baby as they get older, but with a newborn, if you put them near a chest or breast, and they can smell the milk and you don't feed them, they are going to tell you they're upset about it. And then if you make them, if then you remove them and they're not as close, maybe they'll settle because they're like, oh, I guess it's not feeding time. And I guess I wasn't that hungry. But then if you put them close again, they're like, why aren't you feeding me? So just thinking of that too, sometimes it can even be feeding a little bit right before to let them know that yes, your food source is here. Yes, we can feed, but then also you can be close to me and we can use this. And you're not just, we can feed in a carrier. We can talk about it later, but that doesn't mean that that's what we're doing right now. Right. Mm-hmm. I think anytime that we can focus on our own regulation as the caregiver, they're borrowing our nervous system. So if we are feeling anxious about this new experience, which is very normal, they're going to feel that as well. Right? So us taking deep breaths, slowing down our movements. Often we just want to get the baby in the carrier. Instead, we want to think about getting our carrier on, whatever that is. If it's a stretchy wrap, right? You get it wrapped around your body. If it's a buckle carrier, you get the waistband on yourself. You kind of anticipate and know what next steps you're going to do. And then you bring your baby to your body and you just hold them on your chest. You kind of place their head where it's going to go on the hard part of our chest, where you can kiss the top of their head without straining your neck. That's where they're going to go when the carrier's around them. So just getting them there and just holding them. We can do soothing motions, right? Using movement, using shushing sounds, talking to them, hey, we're going to try this. This is something new. I've never done it either. We get to learn together, right? Doing all those little things that we do when we're doing other new things, even changing a diaper, where we'll kind of talk to them about what we're doing and they're fussing and they're crying, right? But we do it anyway. We still change their diaper. And so kind of calming down ourselves and them, and then focusing on getting the carrier around baby and our body, depending on the style of carrier we're using. So that can really help just to sort of set the stage and sort of work up again, right? And then if we can, unless it's really dark or the middle of winter and it's cold, if we can step outside, that can also really help, because it just sort of changes the scenery from what's been happening for baby, lets them kind of get some fresh air, maybe look at some nature. even if it's just like a little bit of grass or like one tree, it just sort of shifts things, right? For us and for babies. So often, right, we'll walk outside with the baby who's fussing and they calm down. Well, we can do that as well with a carrier. We can take, or if we can't, we can like take a little walk in our space, in our house, in our room, up and down the stairs, and allowing baby to try to settle and to feel this carrier. I would also say, making sure that we're optimizing how baby's positioned in the carrier, so like not too low, that they do have that M positioning with their hips, so where they're in, or the other way we can call it is a spread squat position, so they're really seated, their knees are up, and they're well supported, their back is well supported, it's not too tight or too loose. So yeah, like lots of those things we can find online, or we can work with a baby wearing educator. But yeah, getting to know our carriers in pregnancy can also really help, because then we feel a bit more confident, right? It's like well, sometimes we do, but you kind of learn a little bit about your car seat before you actually have to put your baby in it, because if not, you're not going to feel very confident. And just like playing around with it, getting it on your body, using a stuffy, using a bag of rice, knowing what that's supposed to feel like and look like, making adjustments so that the first time you actually try it with your baby, you're feeling just that extra bit more confident, rather than like, I have no idea what this is.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I mean, maybe that's a good segue. Let's talk about the different kinds of carriers and when maybe one might be more indicated for another. Or yeah, I'll just leave it to you of how you educate on the different types and when someone might use one over another.
Yeah. I mean, there are lots of different styles of carriers, and at the same time, right? Like they all have the same function of helping us. We are still the ones carrying our baby, but they help us with that, right? So they help with different weight bearing. Obviously, most carriers help us with being hands-free. There are some carriers that are not hands-free that we see now, like not with newborns, obviously, but those like hip carries where they're sort of like slings that don't go all the way up a baby's back, right? Like they seem to be quite popular these days. Or those like hip seats where baby will sit on it and then we hold them. So those are not hands-free, but can be really helpful. A lot of people use a wrap when they have a newborn. So we can kind of start with that phase of almost like that phase of life. When we think about even just baby wearing, where it came from, and traditional baby wearing, generally it's a simple piece of cloth that is used. Different cloths, some I was mentioning earlier, like some will have straps, some will just be a cloth that we learn to tie. And so that still exists today. We call them woven wraps. In some cultures or communities, right, there's like rebozos that people might have heard of, and other names. Here, like in Canada, generally we might buy a woven wrap, and so a woven wrap can be used from newborn into toddlerhood. They can be worn on the front and on the back, and there are lots of different ways of tying them to, again, bear weight differently. So those can be tied where a lot of weight will be on the shoulders. They can be tied where there's more torso support, or even in fully torso sort of carries that is more of like what we might know as an African style of baby wearing. And they can even create sort of waistband type bearing as well. Most people will use a stretchy wrap with their newborn. So stretchy wraps are, a single piece of cloth that is made out of a stretchy fabric, as the name suggests. They're great. They really feel like a bit of a hug, both for the caregiver and for the baby, right? They have like, depending on the stretch level and the fabric that's used, almost a bit of compression. So they can feel really nice, and a bit of a learning curve to learn how to tighten them, but really comfortable and cozy. We do end up tying them, but there's really no pressure kind of on the waist or near the hips. So not as much downward pressure applied on the pelvic floor, I would say. And then also for someone who's had a cesarean birth, right? Like there's nothing that's going to be around the scar. So in those earlier days, it's often one that's favored because of that, right? When we think about just like the evolution of how we want to carry on our body. And when I say the early days, I don't necessarily mean like get up and baby wear for hours and hours right after birth, right? We want to allow our body to recover, and we can chat about that a bit bit more too. And then there's also, just staying in that simple piece of cloth, there are ring slings where we have a piece of cloth that has rings that are sewn on. And so we use the rings to, again, like tie the sling. The most traditional is where you see the rings near the shoulder, and all of the weight is on one shoulder, and sort of the sling is used. We see it often in a hip carry, but it can be used with a newborn where the newborn is like centered on the body, as we would see with a stretchy wrap or another style of carrier. Those are also really great in early postpartum because, again, there's not any kind of waistband, there's nothing around the waist near a cesarean scar pushing down on the pelvic floor or around the hips or anything like that. And especially with a baby that's a newborn, like the weight is pretty small. And so
when might somebody choose a ring sling versus a stretchy wrap, or does it just come down to personal preference?
it really does come down to personal preference and perhaps how that feels on their body. A stretchy wrap is not going to have as much longevity as a ring sling or a woven wrap. Stretchy wraps are really for that newborn period. In some cases, you might keep using a stretchy wrap in a limited capacity with an older baby, but they, by their nature of being stretchy, their fabric is less supportive. And so the wearer is going to feel more of that like fabric digging into them or even maybe like sagging down depending on the type, right? Like different brands use different fabrics and they hold or feel more stretchy or feel less stretchy in different ways. And so, yeah, I think like the stretchy wrap is often one that, will be outgrown by 6 months, if not earlier, really. And so depending on if someone wants to get one thing that maybe has a little bit more of a learning curve, but then will last for probably all of their baby wearing well into toddlerhood, then a woven wrap or a ring sling will be really useful in those cases. And the other thing that I like to think about, and hopefully you can appreciate too, is thinking about not always using the same carrier actually, so that we are varying the ways that we are using our body. So when we think about even just like using the same shoes all the time or the same pants or the same whatever, we don't necessarily think of pants as being like a functional item, but they can be, right? Like just depending on how they fit on our body, maybe we don't want to wear that exact thing every single day all the time. It can be similar. Whereas, a ring sling, maybe we don't want to be using the ring sling multiple hours a day, every day, always on the same shoulder. We can switch shoulders. We can use a different carrier at certain times. Often what people end up loving about a ring sling is that it's also really quick. So once you know how to use one and it's already threaded on the rings, you just pop it onto yourself and get baby in. A stretchy wrap, you have to tie it on your body. You can put it on your body before you go out. But if you don't, then you have, you're kind of dragging those pieces of fabric either on the ground or trying to tuck them on your car as you're trying to tie it and things like that. A ring sling won't have that. And so often people like it as their like car carrier for something quick or while they're out, or something that's in the house and like easy to just grab and put it on.
Makes sense.
Get
What
into
would be the next phase
Yeah.
of carriers? Yeah.
Yeah, so most people will know buckle carriers, and so those are also known as soft structured carriers. And by soft structured, we mean in contrast with like a hiking pack carrier, which like looks like a big hiking backpack, and then there's a spot for baby to sit sort of up at the top. So soft structured carriers, there are so many varieties, actually. Some are newborn friendly, some are not. What they have in common is that they have a panel, which will be made out of fabric, and then they have straps. And so generally, they will have shoulder straps that buckle onto the carrier and a waistband that buckles as well. Again, those come in lots of different fabrics and sizes and things like that. There are two main styles. I guess there are 4 different ways we can think about these buckle carriers. There are 2 different styles of waistbands, and then there are 2 different styles of shoulder straps. So the 2 different waistbands, there's one that goes on that many people will think of that when they think of a buckle carrier, sort of like where we call it a waterfall style. The waistband goes on, and then the carrier falls kind of forward in front of it. The other style is what we call apron. And so you will put it on like an apron, where when you put the waistband on, it falls just directly on your body.
So what are can you repeat the names again?
Yeah, so we've got a waterfall style waistband.
Okay.
And then an apron style waistband.
Okay. Got it.
And so those different waistbands fit differently on the body, right? So I would say when this type of waistband was sort of invented, like the waterfall style waistband, the idea was that sits on your hips to carry a baby on your back, right? Thinking again of more of like a hiking backpack, a hiking
Yeah.
pack, right? So we think about like a pretty sturdy waistband that sort of allows that weight distribution down to your hips. But now there are some that have, they're not as big or firm, or some of them use different, even foam, right? To create like a different feeling on the body and the way that the weight is distributed, or those kinds of things. Those can actually feel really nice for someone who has had a cesarean birth once their baby is big enough and that waistband is almost like covering it and applying almost that, I want to say almost like a counter pressure to sort of like hold. And then an apron style waistband generally is worn higher up on the body. We use waterfall style waistbands when babies are younger as well. And so we do use them at our natural waist, or sometimes even a bit higher. But then the way that those sort of like push down onto our bodies is going to depend a bit on like the strength of our pelvic floor, the way just like our body shape and everything. As an example, the way that my body's made, I cannot really wear a waistband under my bust, like at my ribs. So traditionally an apron style waistband with like a newborn, that's where you would wear it. You would wear it really up high, and then so that baby can be close enough to kiss like up high where they need to be. I can't wear that because it just falls. I'll literally put a waistband on my ribs, underneath my bust, and it slowly migrates down to my belly button, to my natural waist. It's just the way that my body is made.
What would be some signs, where
Yeah,
one type's not working well for somebody? So that would be one sign, is that if
that's
it's
a
sliding
sign.
down and resting around your belly button. Yeah.
Yeah, and like for the size of the baby. So once a baby is tall enough, 3 to 4 months, and you actually need the waistband to be at your natural waist, then I have no problem at all. Right. So it's even knowing that sometimes you might try something at one phase of your baby's life and growth and development, and it's not working for either of you. And then as they grow, and sometimes even as our postpartum body changes, we might be able to use the same carrier, or we might want something different. And so that apron style carrier, the way that usually they're much thinner, they're not really as padded. And so they're pretty slim and sleek, and they don't apply that same like downward pressure on the hips and then on the pelvic floor. So sometimes people would prefer something like that kind of earlier on postpartum, or if they are dealing with sort of some pelvic floor issues that they're working on with their physio, hopefully, right?
Mhm.
And so that style can be really different, and just apply a different kind of pressure for them. A waterfall style waistband, some people who have short torsos find that they just take up so much space until they get to a point where they're putting them on their hips because their baby's older, right? And so when they get into wearing their, 8, 9, 10, 12-month-old, their toddler, they like a waterfall style waistband. They're putting it on their hips. They're maybe doing a bit of front wearing, but they're doing lots more back wearing, right? We're able to carry a lot more weight on our back than on our front, just the way that the weight gets distributed. And so yeah, different bodies, different time points in baby's development. And then I would also just add that we were going to talk about shoulder straps. So 2 different styles of shoulder straps as well, right? When we're wearing a baby on our front, we have sort of what we usually know as like backpack or shoulder straps that are going to just be over our shoulders and attach with a chest strap, or like they have a clip in the back. And so that's called usually like an H style or like a backpack style shoulder strap. And then we have X back or cross back shoulder straps. And so those, we're literally going to cross the straps in our back, and then the buckles get buckled to the panel. And so again, they distribute weight differently, right? I've had folks I've worked with who really don't like crossback because of the way their shoulder blades are positioned and it just doesn't fit well for them. Or folks who really love it because they're dealing with like scoliosis, where they actually want something that's going to allow them to have it tighter on one side than another to meet their body's requirements. Whereas if they're trying to do an H back, that chest clip won't be level. Like they're sort of having to play around with it in ways that just doesn't work, because they actually need one side to technically be tightened more than the other. And so again, right, we can think about different ways that we can support different bodies to wear comfortably and for however long, those people want.
So interesting. It would make sense to me for somebody in pregnancy to reach out to you and start exploring some of these and trying some of these before baby comes. Or when do you typically recommend, working with somebody, and how do you approach some of these things with them?
Yeah, so prenatally is a great time to learn, right? Because once we have our baby, there's already so much going on, and there's so much learning that we're doing that we couldn't do before. We can't
Mhm.
get to know your baby until they're born, right? So there's already so much. And so anything that we can front load, literally, right, we can start to learn and get those things figured out before is great. I would say that we're still in a place where most people that I work with are reaching out once they've had their baby. Maybe they've even been baby wearing for a while, and either they're starting to explore different ways of doing that, or they're facing issues. They want to baby wear, but they're having back pain or shoulder pain. Often it's like a couple minor fixes of the waistband is being worn in a way that is just causing it to bear weight where it's not supposed to, right? Like we're tightening not quite in the right way, things aren't parallel. So sometimes simple fixes make a big difference. But if we can do that prenatally, if we can talk about sort of the benefits of baby wearing for the baby and their development and get the caregiver confident, and really there are benefits for us as well, right? Like being flooded with oxytocin throughout the day is really lovely. And we can find ways to meet our own needs without feeling as stuck, right? And so we use these tools. And so if we can do that prenatally, yeah, getting to know like why we would even baby wear, and then the different styles and different things we can use to do that. I myself have lots of different carriers that people can try on, or I can sort of point them to ways that they can either try on carriers or buy them in different ways. Because honestly, it's hard, right? There aren't any stores downtown where you can go. Sorry, I say downtown. We're talking about Victoria, but there aren't really any stores you can go in most places where you can try on carriers.
So I see the same thing with nursing pillows too.
Yeah,
They start accumulating different ones, which can be very expensive. Obviously, I'm sure you can take some back, but it just becomes a
absolutely.
frustrating, expensive process because you're
It
just trying,
does.
like throwing, yeah, darts at the wall, right?
Yeah, and sometimes, and like there is quality, right? Like with anything else that we buy, that some carriers have more sort of like research and development and different things that have gone into them, or like when fabric preference, like for example, some of them use organic cottons and linens and natural fibers, and some of them don't, right? There's not necessarily in those cases that one is like better than another. Again, it's going to depend on the person buying, like what they value, and also how it fits for them and their baby. And if it's a carrier you use, that is the most important. Because
Mhm.
having all these wonderful carriers that have all these great benefits and you don't use them is sort of pointless, right? And so, yeah, finding carriers, and that can even mean for some people, like the color and the print are things that they want to wear on their body. And that's okay, right? If you don't want to wear it, it's not going to be useful for you or your baby or your family. And so being able to, yeah, like find something that's going to work for them.
What are maybe the top three challenges that are fairly easily modifiable for people that people come across in baby wearing
The top three challenges.
that
I'd
are
say,
modifiable? Yeah.
yeah, that are easy. I would say that that piece often around like, oh, but I get a pain here, right? Like often that fit is not optimized. So what I mean by that is often like a parallel waistband. Like if we're talking about a buckle carrier that has more of that, what we often see, like that waterfall style waistband, it being positioned on the body in a place that's comfortable, right? So whether that's the natural waist or a little lower or on the hips, and then it being parallel, because anytime that waistband is, let's say we're wearing baby on the front and it's sagging forward, it's pulling on our back. So a lot of people are going to have low back pain with that. And
Yeah.
that's a really, really simple fix. It's just repositioning the waistband and tightening it in a way that it's going to stay there. And then in the way that we put baby in that carrier so that baby's weight isn't actually bearing on the waistband and dragging it down, when really baby's supposed to be sitting in the panel of the fabric of the carrier. So that's like often a really easy fix. And related to that is like shoulder straps. So often people will have that chest clip or strap really up high on their neck, and then they're having neck or shoulder pain. And so positioning it sort of at that armpit level, and then playing around with how tight or loose it is to, see what feels best for their body. So really easy fixes. And then I would say as baby gets older, learning to back wear is like a main thing that I would encourage people to do, because carrying on our front is really heavy.
When can you start back wearing?
So depending on the style of carrier, generally with a self-structured or buckle carrier, the manual of your carrier will likely say around 6 months. We want to be thinking about baby's development because those carriers can't be individually tightened in a way that a woven wrap can, for example. We also didn't talk about the med-aisle style carrier, but that is sort of an in-between a woven wrap and a structured carrier. So they can be tightened in different ways that will allow us to wear babies on the back much earlier on. With a buckle carrier, around 6 months, we want to be thinking more, though, about baby's development. So are they sitting or tripod sitting, which leads us to believe that they have good trunk control and head and neck control, right? So we're less worried about them protecting their own airway because they're not as close for us to monitor in the same way. Even when they're on their back, we're still monitoring our baby, right? Whether that means tuning into ourselves and sort of like feeling or hearing their breath on our body, or like using our phone or a mirror to like look at them and see how they're doing back there. But like around 4 to 6 months typically is when we can sort of start to do that. A lot of people wait a little bit longer, and that's okay. You know, we can start to back wear whenever. However, the earlier we do it, the more baby gets used to it. Again, when we're talking about, does my baby like the carrier? When we practice something with them often, we get used to it, they get used to it, and then it's a tool that we can really use in our day-to-day life. It allows us to have more hands-free, of course, to do things. It allows them to see differently, right? So whether they're kind of up higher and they can see a bit over a shoulder, or they can see on the sides, they have a different view of the world than when they're on the front. And yeah, so that's another thing that I would say is great to do.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point that, aches and pains can sometimes be easily modified with just some adjustments, because I hear it all the time and my clients is my core is not strong enough because I get back pain when I baby wear. And yes, that could be a piece of it, but we equate pain so much, or so often sometimes with dysfunction, when sometimes there can actually be these little tweaks or solutions.
Yeah.
The
And
big difference.
even when we think about it, right? If we say like, well, my core is not strong enough to do this, doing it a little bit, right? If the goal is to baby wear, and this is maybe where there's really that strong connection with even like physiotherapy, right? And that approach is that if the goal is to carry your child, whether that's in arms or with a carrier, you need core strength. You need a strong pelvic floor. We need strength in our back and our, like all of these things, right? We need stamina. We need to be able to be walking and standing with that load in our arms or on our body. So if the goal is to do it, trying to not say, well, oh, if I wear my baby, I have to do it for an hour. Well, what about 10 minutes?
Yeah.
What about 15 minutes, multiple times a day? And what about checking in? How is my core? How's my posture? Is my carrier tight enough so that I'm not leaning and trying to hold with my body in different ways, but I'm really allowing the carrier to hold me and hold my baby in that way, right? So can we use these functionally together to build that strength and to allow us to kind of get to that point if that's the goal, rather than working on strength as a separate thing, but then are we integrating them?
Yeah, it's basic training principles. Progressive overload, you got to start small and slowly build up. And then specificity of training. That's my other, I'm going to just throw some jargon out here, but you're not going to get stronger or better at something unless you actually work at it and train that specific movement. I love that. I think
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
full circle right there. Yeah.
Absolutely. And, and babies are doing the same when we carry them. So we don't have too much time to chat about that. But whatever babies work on the floor is what they also work on when we're carrying them. So that's where a baby carrier and baby wearing is different than kind of what is now called like baby containers. So whether that's a car seat, a stroller, a swing, a bouncer, like any of those things, they don't allow baby to move their muscles in their body in a way that is sort of like favoring their development, I'll say, like, or their pursuit of mobility. When we have them in a carrier, anyone who's worn a baby around 3 or 4 months will say like, well, they're pushing on me. They want to turn around. They want to face forward. Well, what they're doing is pushing like they do on the floor, right? So they're going to put their hands and push up on their caregiver's chest. They're going to turn their head and like turn their body. They're practicing rolling. But instead of doing it with full gravity against them, they're doing it close to us where there's almost like less pressure, right? It's like a lower pressure environment. And also with our assistants, as they get a bit older, they start to like lean away from us. And often we bring them back, like, because it's hard for our center of gravity when our kiddo is like leaning away. But what they're doing is the same thing as they do on the floor when they're practicing sitting, and they're kind of leaning. And we're doing assisted crunches with them. We're bringing them back. We're showing their muscle. This is what it feels like to do that. And then when we start to wear them on our back, they'll do that crawling motion, right? Because it's around the time they're starting to practice crawling. So they'll move their knees, or when we're getting them settled on our back, right? If we sit down with a baby who's a bit older and their feet touch, they're going to push up on their feet. They're going to kind of do those stepping motions, or when they're really little as well. And they're going to like pull on our shoulders, on the shoulder straps. They're going to pull to stand. They're practicing all of those things that their muscles need practice with to get to those milestones. And they do that on our body. But often it can feel like my baby doesn't like the carrier. My baby's rejecting me. My baby wants to face forward, or they want a particular thing. So we can do a hip carry where they can see more of the world and they can push up on us in a different way. We can face them forward in certain carriers. We also want to think about limiting that a little bit, because then they can't really check in with us, right? They're facing out and they can't really shut off whatever they're seeing. So if they need to kind of take a break, they can't do it in the same way as when they're facing us or on our back or anywhere else. They kind of have no choice in the matter. And then on our body, it's also harder when sort of like the baby's facing out and then their center of gravity, like it's kind of pulling us forward a little bit. So as they get bigger, that gets a bit harder to do. So yeah, we want to use it as one of the tools, one of the strategies that we have, right? But it's never a milestone that we have to achieve with facing out.
Yeah, those are such good points just around what we were talking about earlier, around some of the fussiness around the carrier, and also around just some of the natural development and reflexes when baby's in the carrier too. So yeah, super interesting conversation. But I loved learning about the history and the different types. And I think, yeah, it's a good reminder for physios out there as well. Just how much is involved in bringing in somebody who's an expert like yourself could be really valuable for our clients to work together. So thank you so much, Sarah. Any last little nuggets or take homes for our listeners?
Yeah, I would just leave with all bodies are baby wearing bodies. So if you feel like your body isn't, then maybe seek out some support so that you can find the right carrier for you and your baby.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you have the opportunity to do it in pregnancy, prenatally, super valuable. I always say that to my clients, working on your pelvic health prenatally. It's so much easier to just review, reassess, and kind of reconvene postpartum rather than trying to learn something totally new when you're sleep deprived and overwhelmed and just trying to navigate life. Same philosophy there.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting ready to be a parent while we're pregnant is great whenever we can do that, right? So we prepare a lot for birth, and if we can prepare as much or even more to be a parent to that child, yeah, that's a great way to approach things.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining me today, Sarah. This was a really educational and informative for myself, and I hope our listeners as well. If anyone wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to connect? And I can add any contact info in the show notes as well.
Yeah, so my website is heartkey.ca and my Instagram is at heartkey.babywearing. So that's really the best spots. And if folks are in the Victoria area, there are a couple educators now in the Victoria, BC area, and we've started the Victoria Babywearing Collective, which is going to be a space for us to have free meetups and events, and also, paid workshops and different things like that. So a couple different educators with their businesses, but also trying to build some community around it as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for sharing. I'll share those resources in the notes. Well, I hope you have a good rest of your week. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of TMI Tuesdays, and we'll see you again next Tuesday. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of TMI Tuesdays. Women's health is complex, nuanced, and deserves better conversations. If this episode resonated with you, I would absolutely love if you followed and subscribed to the podcast on Spotify and shared it with someone who might need to hear it. We'll see you again next Tuesday. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of TMI Tuesdays. Women's health is complex, nuanced, and deserves better conversations. If this episode resonated with you, I would absolutely love if you followed and subscribed to the podcast on Spotify and shared it with someone who might need to hear it. We'll see you again next Tuesday.